What if the reason your life hasn't changed yet has nothing to do with your effort, your faith, or even your worthiness, and everything to do with a message you've been receiving but never fully opening? Because here's the thing nobody is saying out loud: God has already spoken. He already sent the answer to the prayer you're still praying. He already pointed to the door you're still walking past. And he didn't do it once, he did it 3 times. Which means the question was never whether God was speaking. The question is whether you were finally ready to hear it. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for a sign, not realizing that the sign already came, twice, and they called it a coincidence both times. The chosen ones aren't the ones with the most faith, the cleanest record, or the loudest prayers. They're the ones who finally stopped long enough to recognize a pattern that was never random. And that pattern has a structure. It has a rhythm. And once you see it, you will never be able to look at your life the same way again. Here's the counterintuitive truth that this video is built on: the delays in your life were not punishments. The broken seasons, the closed doors, the moments where everything fell apart, those were not signs that God had forgotten you. They were the second delivery. And if you're watching this today, something in you already knows that the third one has arrived. Spiritual awakening doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes dressed as a YouTube video on a quiet afternoon, and the person watching it is never quite the same after. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me, which delivery are you in? The first, the second, or do you already feel the weight of the third? I want to know, because this conversation is bigger than a video. And if this is already hitting something deep, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to this channel, because what's coming next in this series was built specifically for the version of you that is finally ready to say yes. There's something most people aren't willing to admit: God has already tried to speak to you before. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And more often than not, the chosen one never even noticed. The first delivery came quietly, almost invisibly, like a whisper in the middle of a loud and crowded life. It was real, it was clear, it was divine, but the ground wasn't prepared yet to receive what was being planted. And just like that, the seed landed, and was carried away by the wind. The second time was different. This time, the chosen one actually felt it. Something deep shifted, a recognition that lasted a few seconds, maybe even a few days. But fear arrived before faith did, noise arrived before the answer could, and distraction did what it always does: it put out the flame before it could become a fire. God's voice was right there, unmistakable, but life kept moving as if nothing had happened. And that moment has a name: hesitation. But here's what changes everything: the third delivery isn't coincidence, it's confirmation. Throughout all of Scripture, the number 3 carries the weight of completion, divine witness, and final decision. God called Samuel 3 times before he recognized the voice. Peter denied Jesus 3 times and was restored 3 times. Jonah needed 3 days in the belly of the whale before he finally moved in the right direction. God's plan never changed, but the timing of each delivery was never random. God's patience is not passivity, it is precision. He doesn't repeat the same message because he made a mistake the first time. He repeats it because he knows exactly when you'll be ready to receive what's being sent. Think of it this way: it's like a letter sent 3 times to the same address. The sender hasn't changed. The message hasn't changed. The address hasn't changed. The only thing that changed is that this time, when the letter arrived, someone was finally home to open the door. And that's exactly where divine purpose starts to make real sense. Not when everything is easy, not when the path is fully lit from beginning to end, but when you look back and realize that the message was always there, waiting for the precise moment when you would become who you needed to be to carry it. And the question that lingers is simple, but heavy: what if the third delivery has already arrived, and you just haven't recognized it yet? The first time came as a whisper, and whispers are easy to dismiss. It was a quiet nudge, an open door that felt almost too ordinary to be divine, a moment of clarity that passed through your mind like a breeze through an open window. You felt it, but you didn't act on it. Maybe it seemed too small, too uncertain, or too costly for what your life looked like at the time. And so you kept moving, kept building, kept living, and the whisper faded. But here's what you need to understand: God's message doesn't fade because it was wrong. It fades because the season wasn't ready yet. The second time came as a disruption. Something broke. Something ended. Something was taken, or something forced a pause that you didn't ask for and didn't want. And right there, in the middle of the wreckage or the silence or the confusion, the message showed up again, face to face, unavoidable. This time it wasn't a whisper, it was a collision. But even then, most chosen ones find a way to move around it instead of through it. They rebuild fast, they stay busy, they call it healing, when really, they're just creating distance between themselves and the answer. The third time came as everything at once. A convergence of signs so undeniable that ignoring it would require more effort than simply receiving it. The same confirmation from different directions, the same message through different voices, the same door appearing in different forms, until the weight of it became impossible to carry without making a decision. Spiritual awakening rarely looks like a lightning bolt. More often, it looks like the slow and relentless accumulation of things you can no longer explain away. And here's something that might stop you in your tracks: you are in the third delivery right now. The fact that you're watching this video, on this specific day, is not the fourth coincidence, it is the message arriving in its most direct and final form. Faith isn't just believing in what you can't see. Sometimes faith is having the courage to recognize what's already standing right in front of you, dressed in the ordinary clothes of a regular Tuesday. When chosen ones finally step into their breakthrough, they almost always look back and describe the three deliveries with perfect clarity. They say things like, "I knew the first time, but I wasn't ready." They say, "The second time broke me, but I still ran." And then they say something that tends to stay with you: "The third time, I finally understood that it was never going to stop coming, because I was always the one it was meant for." That pattern is not random. That pattern is called by God. The first time you missed it, you weren't wrong to be cautious, you were just not yet who you needed to be to carry what the message was asking for. And that's not a failure, that's formation. The person you are today didn't arrive overnight. They were built through every missed moment, every wrong turn, every season that felt like a detour but was actually a classroom. God's plan has never been about punishing you for what you weren't ready for. It has always been about preparing you for what you couldn't yet hold. The second time is where it gets more personal, and more honest. Because the second time, fear dressed itself as wisdom. You called it not being ready. You called it not being sure. You called it not being worthy. But underneath all of those reasonable-sounding explanations was something much heavier: the weight of what saying yes would actually require you to give up, change, or become. And that weight is real. Nobody should minimize it. But here's the truth that chosen ones eventually have to face: the cost of saying yes will never feel comfortable, and waiting for comfort is just another name for waiting forever. Here's something the enemy doesn't want you to know: he is always present at the second delivery. His strategy is never to convince you that the message is false, he knows you'd see through that. His strategy is far more subtle and far more effective. He whispers that you are not the right recipient. That someone else is more qualified, more prepared, more deserving. That God's voice couldn't possibly be speaking to someone with your history, your mistakes, your doubts. And if he can make you question the address on the envelope, he doesn't need to steal the letter, you'll hand it back yourself. You were also waiting for the message to arrive in a form you expected. A dramatic sign. An undeniable miracle. A voice from outside that would remove all doubt and make the decision for you. But divine purpose rarely arrives with fanfare. It arrives in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the broken, in the conversation you almost didn't have, in the door you almost didn't open, in the moment of stillness you almost filled with noise. Chosen ones learn, often the hard way, that God speaks most clearly in the places we're most tempted to look away from. Someone once described 3 distinct moments in their life where God sent the same invitation: to leave something behind, to begin something new, to surrender something they were gripping too tightly. The first time, they laughed it off. The second time, they cried and stayed anyway. But the third time, they said yes, and everything that followed confirmed what they had quietly known all along: it was always the right answer. It was just waiting for the right version of them to receive it. And that version? It was never as far away as they thought. You are not who you were the last time this arrived. Let that settle for a moment. The version of you sitting here today, with everything you've been through, everything you've survived, everything you've quietly carried without anyone knowing, is closer, stronger and more prepared than the one who missed it before. God's message was never sent to the version of you that wasn't ready. It was always addressed to this one. The one who made it through the first 2 deliveries and is still here, still watching, still searching for something that feels like it was made specifically for them. Because it was. The thing you've been postponing is the thing. Not someday. Not when conditions improve. Not when you feel more ready, more stable, more certain. Chosen ones have a particular talent for turning divine urgency into a future project, filing away God's voice under, when the time is right, when the message has always been saying something far more direct: now. The door that keeps appearing in your life is not appearing by accident. It is appearing because the answer is behind it, and because God doesn't decorate his plan with repetition, he confirms it with it. The person, the place, or the decision that keeps surfacing in your spirit is not random. You've tried to explain it away. You've called it anxiety, nostalgia, overthinking. But deep down, underneath the noise of daily life and the comfort of routine, there is something that keeps returning: quiet, persistent, patient. That persistence is not your imagination. That is called by God, and it sounds exactly like the thing you keep almost saying yes to before pulling back at the last second. Spiritual awakening often begins not with a revelation, but with finally stopping long enough to listen to what never stopped speaking. What you've been afraid to lose is what's been keeping you from what you were chosen to receive. And that's the part nobody talks about openly, because it's the part that hurts the most. The relationship, the identity, the version of your life that feels safe, these things are real, and the grief of releasing them is real. But faith has always contained a surrender, and the surrender has always been the threshold. Every chosen one who stepped into their breakthrough describes the same moment, the moment they released what they were holding too tightly and felt, for the first time, what it was like to be held instead. Someone once said that the moment they finally said yes on the 3rd delivery, the aftermath wasn't immediate ease, it was immediate rightness. A deep, unshakable knowing that they had finally stopped swimming against the current and stepped into it. Things didn't become perfect overnight. But they became meaningful in a way that nothing before had ever been. That's what God's message carries inside it, not the promise of a smooth road, but the promise that you will finally be walking on the right one. And somewhere ahead on that road, the question of what comes next is already being answered. The first thing a chosen one must do after receiving the message is acknowledge it, out loud, in prayer, in writing, in whatever form makes it real and tangible and impossible to quietly walk back from. Because here's what most people do instead: they receive the clarity, they feel the weight of it, they know in their spirit that something has shifted, and then they stay silent about it. They keep it internal, keep it private, keep it safe from the vulnerability of being spoken into existence. But God's message was never meant to live only in your chest. It was meant to move through your mouth, through your hands, through your feet, into the world it was always designed to change. Don't go back and mourn the first 2 times. This is important, and it needs to be said clearly, because chosen ones are particularly vulnerable to this particular trap. The delays were not failures. The missed deliveries were not punishments. They were formation, the exact and necessary process of becoming who you needed to be to carry what is now being handed to you. Mourning the past is just another way of standing still in the present. Every day spent grieving the seasons you weren't ready is a day stolen from the season you finally are. God's plan didn't lose anything in the waiting. And neither did you. Move on it before the feeling fades, and it will try to fade. That quiet urgency you feel right now, that sense of recognition and readiness, is one of the most fragile and most sacred things a human being can experience. The enemy knows this better than most, which is why his favorite move after a breakthrough moment is to introduce delay. To whisper that you should sleep on it, think about it more, wait until Monday, wait until the new year, wait until everything is perfectly aligned. Chosen ones who receive clarity and wait for the feeling to pass before acting are not being wise, they are choosing the fourth delivery. And the fourth delivery is always harder than the third. Tell God exactly what you're afraid of. Not to be talked out of it, but because honesty with God about your fear is the first act of real trust, and trust is what the message has been asking for all along. Write it down if you have to. Say it out loud in an empty room. Name the thing that makes your hands sweat when you think about actually saying yes. Because faith doesn't begin when fear disappears, faith begins when you move forward and bring the fear with you. That's not weakness. That is the most courageous thing a human being can do in response to a divine invitation. Take one visible step today. Not the whole journey. Not the full plan, fully mapped out, fully funded, fully understood. Just one movement in the direction the message has been pointing, one conversation you've been avoiding, one application you've been sitting on, one prayer you've been too afraid to pray out loud. The step doesn't have to be large. It has to be real. And then do something that might feel strange but carries more power than most people realize, speak the message back to God as a yes. Name what He has been saying, clearly, specifically, out loud, and say yes to it with your voice. Because the chosen one who finally says yes out loud is not the same person who walked in silent. And that difference is exactly where breakthrough begins. So here's where everything lands. God sent the message the first time, and you weren't ready. He sent it the second time, and fear convinced you to stay still. And now the third delivery is here, sitting in your hands, on this screen, in this moment that was never accidental. The question is no longer whether you've received it. The question is what you're going to do with it now that you have. Think about your life for a moment, honestly, without the filters and the excuses and the comfortable explanations. Is there something you've been circling for months, maybe years, that keeps coming back no matter how many times you walk away from it? Is there a decision you've been postponing that somehow never fully leaves the back of your mind? Is there a version of your life that you can picture clearly but have been too afraid to step into? Because that thing, that persistent, returning, undeniable thing, is not random. That is your message. And it has been waiting for exactly this version of you to finally say yes. Don't let this be another moment you feel something real and then go back to normal. Chosen ones are not chosen because they never doubted, they are chosen because at some point, in spite of the doubt, they moved anyway. So move. Take the step. Make the call. Say the prayer out loud. Write down what God has been saying and speak it back to Him as a yes. Not someday. Not when you feel ready. Today, because today is exactly why the third delivery came when it did. And here's the question I want to leave you with, the one I want you to sit with long after this video ends. If you already know what the message is, and somewhere deep down, you do, what would your life look like 1 year from now if you finally said yes to it today? What would you have built, released, become, or stepped into? Hold that picture. Because that picture is not a fantasy. That is your divine purpose, fully activated, waiting on the other side of one decision. If this video spoke to something real inside of you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who is in their second delivery and doesn't know it yet. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because everything we're building here is designed for the person who is done being on the outside of the life they were chosen for. The next video continues exactly where this one left off, and you don't want to miss what's coming. See you there.